But we do begin with the war against Iran, with gas prices moving higher yet again, and the president's allies trying to buy him more time to end the conflict and avoid a messy showdown with Congress. It comes as Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Joint Chiefs Chairman General Dan Kane defended the scope, mission, and price tag of the war as they were grilled by lawmakers on Capitol Hill for a second straight day. Hegseth also telling senators the ongoing ceasefire has paused the clock on the constitutional requirement that the president come to Congress at the 60-day mark of this war, which would be tomorrow.
Is the president intending to either seek congressional authorization for the war in Iran or send us the legally required certification that he needs an additional 30 days to remove U.S. forces from the war?
Ultimately, I would defer to the White House and White House counsel on that. However, we are in a ceasefire right now, which our understanding means the 60-day clock pauses or stops in a ceasefire. You're not in. Yeah. It's our understanding, just so you know.
Okay, well, I do not believe the statute would support that. I think the 60 days runs maybe tomorrow, and it's going to pose a really important legal question for the administration.
House Speaker Mike Johnson telling my colleague Ryan Nobles there is no clock because this isn't a war.
It's time for Congress to weigh in on the war in Iran, especially now that we're past the 60-day threshold.
I don't think we have any active kinetic military bombing, firing, anything like that right now. We're trying to broker a peace, and I would be very reluctant to get in front of the administration in the midst of these very sensitive negotiations. So we'll have to see how that plays out.
But the Constitution specifically states 60 days. But the president has called it a war. You're saying we're not at war right now?
I'm saying that we do not have kinetic military action at the moment.
Now, we should note, as Ryan pointed out, the president himself has referred to this conflict numerous times as a war, while also acknowledging that calling it a war would require him to come to Congress. Look.
We don't want to make the war any more complex than it already is. Oil will be coming down. That's just a matter of war. The war itself is being prosecuted as well as anybody has ever seen. We got a war going on. The war is proceeding very, very strongly.
I won't use the word war because they say if you use the word war, that's maybe not a good thing to do. They don't like the word war because you're supposed to get approval. So I'll use the word military operation. The war in Iran is going along swimmingly.
That's the way war goes, right?
Military operation. I don't call it a war. Would you rather have a military operation? We're really, Iran is dying to make a deal.
The president's next move in this conflict remains uncertain. An official telling NBC News the president's top national security team was planning to brief him about his options at the Strait of Hormuz and on the ground in Iran. With traffic in the vital strait still effectively frozen, gas prices continue to spike, reaching a 4-year high of $4.30 a gallon. That's according to AAA. That's up more than 27 cents from just 1 week ago. President Trump telling reporters moments ago this would be short-term pain and notably once again referring to this as a war.
The gas will go down. As soon as the war's over, it'll drop like a rock. There's so much of it. It's all over the place, sitting all over the oceans of the world. And it'll go down. But what won't happen is if Iran had a nuclear weapon and used it, then the whole world is a different place. You're not going to have to pay a little bit more for gasoline. The gasoline, the oil will go down rapidly as soon as the war is over.
We've got our team of correspondents to start us off today. NBC News senior national security correspondent Courtney Kube joins me now, along with NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba, NBC News chief Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles, and NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Cheung. Thanks to all of you for being here. Courtney, of course, I have to start with you, staked out on Capitol Hill for 2 straight days. More fireworks today, Court, in this Senate hearing. What were your biggest takeaways from the day?
Yeah, so, today it was beyond just Iran. We heard about things like how Secretary of Defense has fired a number of people. In fact, from the ranking member, Senator Jack Reed, about how the secretary has fired, it seems to be prioritizing black men and women in his taking people out of jobs and firing them from senior officer, general officer positions. We also heard a little bit of questions about the secretary's decision-making, whether he would, in fact, potentially defy the Constitution or defy the law to carry out an order if, in fact, President Trump gives him that one. But Iran was the biggest topic overall today. And pretty universally, we didn't get any new facts or stats or details or anything, but we did have a number of senators, primarily on the Democratic side, who expressed a lot of concern about where this war is going, with very little information about how the U.S. is continuing to spend $1 billion a day, and it's not really clear when or how this ends.
Yeah, lawmakers I've spoken to continue to say there's still this big question about what the goal is, Court, as you're pointing out. I want to zero in on some key exchanges here. Senators Mark Kelly and Alyssa Slotkin, we should note they were both investigated by the Justice Department for telling service members they could disobey orders that they deemed to be illegal. They pressed Secretary Hegseth on two things: the limits of his legal authority and issues tied to the war, and also U.S. elections. Take a look. Get your reaction on the other side.
Your quote was, "We will keep pushing, keep advancing, no quarter, no mercy for our enemies." And yesterday, you did not clarify whether you stand by this statement. So I'm going to give you another opportunity to clarify if that is what you meant. Do you stand by that statement you made on March 13th?
We have untied the hands of our warfighters. We fight to win, and we follow the law.
Your response here, right now, makes it clear to the American people exactly why you are not right for this job.
It makes it clear to our enemies, Senator.
If the president, who regrets not signing that executive order to the then SecDef in 2020, asks you to seize ballots or voting machines in states during the 2026 election, will you stand up for the Constitution and say no, or will you salute and do his bidding?
It's yet another gotcha hypothetical, which is your specialty.
It's not. What are you going to do? You're the guy here in the seat. It's not hypothetical. Tell the American people, will you deploy the uniformed military to our polls to collect voter rolls or machines?
Are you accusing me of performing? Because you're performing for cable news right now.
But
Mr.
just answer the question.
We have
Pretty heated exchanges there, Court. How did it play in the room? What's the reaction been to those exchanges?
Yeah, it was pretty heated in there. I mean, the one thing about Secretary Hegseth is when there's a question he doesn't want to answer like that, even when there is a simple answer, and he's spoken about it before, he attacks the premise of the question, and he did that in both of those cases. And in fact, Senator Mark Kelly actually came back for a second round of questioning as well. Senator Kelly, though, it's an interesting line of questioning for him because of exactly what you said about the video that he made with the others. He is asking whether, in fact, Secretary Hegseth, standing at the Pentagon podium only a few weeks ago, while the U.S. was still very actively engaged in offensive combat operations, he said that the U.S. would provide no quarter, no mercy. Now, he has been asked several times since then if, in fact, he still believes that, and he refuses to say it. But he also refuses to denounce that he said that. And so the reason that is so concerning to someone like Mark Kelly, who served for more than 20 years in the military, is exactly what that means. That means that the U.S., if in fact they were to take an Iranian military person prisoner as a POW, that they would potentially kill that person. That's what that means. And so it is seen as an illegal order, and the Secretary of saying it from the podium at the Pentagon, some people would interpret that as that being an order from him to the men and women. So it's been a very cloudy issue. And once again here, he was given an opportunity to clear it up, and he refused.
Well, just an extraordinary 2 days on Capitol Hill with the Secretary of War. Courtney, Kube, thank you so much for starting us off. As always, Monica, Alba, let me turn to you now at the White House. As you've been reporting on, we are, of course, approaching the 60-day mark start of this war. That is tomorrow. What are your sources at the White House telling you about this day? Are they acknowledging that this is a significant day and that the president would need to go to Congress?
Well, the White House is acknowledging to me, Kristen, that there are active conversations between the administration and Capitol Hill about what appears to be tomorrow's deadline. Now, remember, the bombs actually started falling in Iran on February 28th, but according to the War Powers resolution, the president then had 48 hours to formally notify Congress of this military conflict. And when he did that, it was technically March 2nd. And so that kicked off a 60-day timeline that would end tomorrow, May 1st, where he either does need to get an approval from Congress, an authorization to continue this war, or tell Congress that he is potentially seeking some kind of a 30-day extension to withdraw U.S. forces safely, and that is why he would need that additional time. But there are really some questions that are being raised by lawmakers, by the House Speaker, as you played there in your introduction, about whether this 60-day timeline is going to apply or not. If you look at the actual law, it certainly does apply to tomorrow, but the White House is not saying yet what the president intends to do, just that they are going to be going back and forth and trying to figure out exactly how they're going to handle it. But it does seem like it could go a couple of ways. But tomorrow is that deadline. So the president does need to make a determination or a decision. But we know that there are upcoming meetings that could still help inform exactly what the president plans to do. Kristen.
Monica, Alba, stay there. I have more for you, but let me go to Ryan momentarily on the Hill. Ryan, this remarkable exchange you had with House Speaker Mike Johnson telling you we are not at war. Is that what other Republicans are saying? What's the thinking there?
I think you'll find very few Republicans that would say it in as declarative a fashion as what Mike Johnson said to me today. And he did attempt to try and clean it up a little bit after he initially made that statement that we are not at war, and then describe what he believes is essentially the end of hostilities for the moment in this kind of soft ceasefire that the United States has implemented in this situation with Iran. But it does ignore the fact that there is an active naval blockade, that there are all these military troops that are in the region right now, and that there is still an issue with the Strait of Hormuz. And to Monica's point about this 60-day threshold, the White House can go back and forth. They can ask their counsel about it. But ultimately, if there aren't leaders in Congress that are willing to enforce this deadline or look the other way as the deadline passes, or take the administration's argument that a ceasefire doesn't count toward the ultimate calculation of that 60-day threshold, it really doesn't hold any weight. It doesn't really matter. And right now, Republican leaders who would be the ones that would have to force the administration to come to Congress to get that approval just do not seem compelled to take that step. So for the most part, it really doesn't mean much.
But Ryan, there is a divide, right? Some Republicans do believe that 60-day mark is significant.
Oh, there's no doubt. I talked to Senator Tom Tillis earlier today, the Republican from North Carolina, who's been relatively outspoken against the administration, especially since he decided not to run for re-election. And he agreed that Congress needs to weigh in, that there needs to be an authorization of the use of military force. And Tillis had an interesting argument with this, Kristen. He was coming at it not from the perspective of, I'm opposed to this action, or that I think the administration's made a wrong choice in Iran. It's that he needs to help the administration sell this war to the American people. And it's difficult for him to do that if they don't have that box check of that 60-day threshold and the authorization of Congress to conduct this war. And he believes it just makes life more difficult for the White House than it needs to be. And so there are a wide range of Republicans that believe that Congress needs to be involved, that the administration needs to answer specific questions about the cost, about the length of time, about the goals, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they'd be opposed to any of those answers to those questions, but they need those answers to those questions if this campaign is to continue.
Well, in your conversation with Senator Tillis, really lays out that divide so clearly. Ryan Nobles on Capitol Hill, thank you so much for that reporting. Monica, let me go back to you at the White House. You talked about the briefings that the president's been getting. We know he had a CENTCOM briefing today, presenting him with a range of options, potential next steps in Iran. What are you learning about what happened in that briefing?
It seems like this has been a series of meetings that have continued to develop all week long, Kristen. We know Monday started with a Situation Room meeting with his national security team, where he was initially presented with some options about the Strait of Hormuz, what to do about the naval blockade, which the president has indicated publicly he could keep around for an extended amount of time. There are questions about how that would factor into a continuation of this conflict and how Congress would view that. But taking that aside, we know he also met with oil executives at the White House on Tuesday to try to kind of figure out the more economic aspect to everything. And then today he was set to receive a briefing from Admiral Cooper, according to reporting from court on the panel, of course, with us. And that is specifically important because that means that the president could be presented today with more specific military options about whether the president is going to continue with a military engagement in the short term or whether he's going to decide that that is not necessary. It's unclear exactly in which direction direction the president wants to take this. And we know that he is sort of thinking about this as needing to make a decision in the next day or two to kind of figure out the timing. And so that is an important meeting we know was scheduled to take place today. The president did not speak about it in his earlier event on camera. So we're still trying to get more details about it.
So, Monica, you talk about the economic impact. We have to talk about gas prices. They've reached their highest point this year. They continue to rise. Based on your conversations, how much concern is there inside the administration about what we're seeing? And I know Kevin Hassett weighed in on this today.
Yeah, he had some really interesting sound on this, and he has, over the last couple of months, sort of dismissed this idea, saying that it was a lower priority, that people's concerns about this were sort of low on the list of things that the White House was needing to really put their attention on. But here's sort of how he put the administration's thinking on it today, and we'll talk about it on the other side.
We've done the Jones Act. We've opened up drilling in California. We've, pursued changing the ethanol standards so that the corn ethanol can be used more in the summer. We've taken every single step that we can, and we understand that it would have been a lot worse if we hadn't done that. But the fact is that our expectation is that things are going to get better very, very quickly if we could just get the Iranians to finish the negotiations.
So really, Kristen, it's your definition of very, very quickly. The president, remember, had indicated that there would be this sort of pain at the pump in the short term, but that was a worthy cost to pay, he said, for Iran not having a nuclear weapon. Those were his words. Then you had top cabinet officials who were saying that these gas prices could remain this high through the midterms, and then they had to walk that back, including the Energy Secretary, Chris Wright, in recent weeks. And then the president just again today acknowledging these higher gas prices, promising they're going to come down at some point, but who knows? It's anybody's guess when that will actually happen.
And looming so large over all of this, the midterm elections. Monica Alba from the White House. Monica, thank you so much, as always, for covering all of those angles for us. Brian, let me turn to you now. Let's pick up right there on these gas prices, up about 20 cents a gallon over just the last 3 days. Why this sudden acceleration, Brian?
Yeah, well, it really has everything to do with the lack of progress in negotiations with Iran. Oil markets don't like that, and for that reason, oil has been trading higher, and that means higher prices at the pump. As you see on that chart ahead of you, $4.30. That's up over 44% since the start of this war. Crazy to think we were at $2.98 prior to this conflict beginning. But the big story here is that there's expectation that with no traffic going through the Strait of Hormuz, as you can see on that chart ahead of you, that prices will likely continue to rise. Patrick DeHaan over at Gas Buddy predicting that the next stop will be $4.50 on an average, and every single state in just the last day, Kristen, saw gas prices increase on an average basis.
Wow, that is a staggering figure. So President Trump's argument is once he ends the war in Iran, gas prices will immediately start to come down. Is that how economists see it?
Yeah, well, look, and I think that from the Kevin Hassett clip that we just played, it seems like the administration seems to be satisfied with what it's been doing so far. And we did get some other action from the administration in just the last few minutes. Our D.C. team reporting that the Trump administration is launching a U.S.-led, which I think is a significant global effort to really restore navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. It sounds like the administration wants to engage other nations around the world. We don't really have that list of what specific nations have been asked to be part of this body, but our team is reporting that Secretary Rubio approved the creation of this specific body. But I think another question, Kristen, is that we have the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which is supposed to be a way that we can tap domestic supply that could alleviate prices at the pump for Americans. Now, there's been some partial release of that in coordination with other nations in the first few weeks of this conflict having begun. Will the administration try to release more? That is another lever that they could pull, despite the administration's insistence that they've done everything that they can so far.
All right, Brian Cheung breaking down the dollars and cents for us. Thank you so much for being here, Brian. Really appreciate it.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.